You're listening to the podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood, and I am joined today by Tony Simmons. He's the CEO and founder of Sonnant. Tony, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
So, Tony, you and I have known each other for a little while, and actually, in all transparency, at True Native Media, we use your product and have very much enjoyed it. It's been a big help for us. But I'm curious, what kind of brought you into the podcasting space? How did you get here?
Yeah, I did a little bit of radio when I was at school and at university, and I did have designs on being a disc jockey when I was younger. Having pushy professional parents, they sort of steered me down towards textbooks more than microphones, but I always kept it in the background. And after a couple of business ventures, I got back to a microphone. It became, one of these things in 2016. Everyone had a podcast or was going into podcasting. I thought I'd join the fray, and I was in between business ventures, and I started interviewing Australian entrepreneurs that I really just wanted to meet. And so I used the podcast almost as a Trojan horse to sit in the room with them, and then quickly started to realize, gee, there's a lot of work involved in having a show, editing it, promoting it, clipping it up. And so just getting back involved with it, I saw maybe technology can automate some of these manual processes, and maybe there's ways to use artificial intelligence as it was sort of coming up and bubbling up back then to enhance the workflow. So that was sort of the thought process. And that's really how I got back involved in it, sort of trying to meet people and then trying to create a business out of that technology that could help it.
I'm curious, is that podcast? I noticed when I was looking through your LinkedIn profile that you had that listed. Are you still creating new episodes of that entrepreneurial podcast?
I'm not. No, I put it on hold because we just kind of got really busy. And as you know, as a business owner, you have to be kind of all in and focused on your core business, and trying to grow a software company globally takes a lot of effort and energy. So I had to put that to the side, but I do think about it regularly and getting back in at some day soon. That'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I also noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you're the CEO of Marketplace Ventures, which is a software incubator. Is that company still active?
It is. I kind of use that now as sort of the personal investment vehicle. But at one point in time, it was down here in Melbourne, a very active incubator and accelerator. We had an office full of people and startups, and we were putting investment into some of these early stage companies. So I did that for a couple of years, but what happened was got involved in a couple of companies that really started to grow. And I was more interested at that point in time in actually being hands-on in the companies and helping them grow than running the incubator and changing sort of passwords on door locks and those sorts of things, because that kind of goes with the territory with managing a shared space. So again, the focus sort of became, let's go more all in on some of these companies. And then as those investments continue to bubble away, this just became my sort of vehicle to invest in other companies, Sonnant being one of them. Sonnant is another marketplace ventures company.
Well, and I think what to me is most fascinating about it is that when you're running an incubator, you have so many different opportunities coming at you. And especially from that software and technology perspective. And so it really stood out to me that the fact that you chose podcasting must have meant that there was something special about podcasting. And I have to say that I'm curious what your take is on this, but I've talked to a person or two who has said that software development, technology in general in the podcast space is not up to snuff, that it's leaving something to be desired. So I guess I'm curious kind of what your feel is. Do you think that there is something really here? I mean, obviously you see that or you wouldn't be here, but maybe where are we lacking and what's pulling you toward the industry?
That's a good question. I think well, the first thing you mentioned about the incubator was when people come in and out of the office space, you really get to see who's who. And when you're investing in really early stage businesses, you're really looking at the founder and whether he or she's got that sort of intestinal fortitude. So having the office space gave almost like a filtering, natural filtering process. You could see who was committed, who was coming in, who was side hustling. And that helped me get in deep with particular companies.
Mhm.
I did sort of, Sonnant came about for a number of different reasons. One, I started to want to be my own founder again. So not work with others, have two hands on the steering wheel, so to speak. And then we really started this process of going, okay, can we automate elements of the podcast? Actually went really deep at the industry and looked at what software was. Back then, we're talking about not only the long tail of podcasting, which we're still talking about, but the long tail of software that percolated across the podcast industry, because there was some big players like Triton, but there was also lots of bit parts across the production and publication life cycle. So when looking at that, we saw, gee, there's an opportunity around digital transformation. Here's an industry that's a lot of ex-radio people moved into podcasting. So they've got a real analog background, doing things with the same sort of metaphors, I guess, that were done in the 60s. I always say people used to cut tape when they were in the recording studio and splice it together. And then if you look at Premiere Pro, I was doing the exact same metaphor, except it was on a screen. So I was cutting it, splicing it together. What's the next evolution of that? What's the AI evolution? What's the next digital evolution of that that's going to speed up these things? And I say we, as me and my business partner, Steve, took a view that, yes, there's still a huge amount of digital transformation to go in broadcast and podcast. We thought that was an industry that if we got in early with software, we could be part of the furniture for years to come. That was the approach. Fruition, but that was the thought process.
Yeah, for sure. And how many years have you been at this now?
Yeah, so it probably started during the pandemic. So the first sort of ideas over a bottle of wine. We were in a pretty serious lockdown here in Melbourne. So Steve lives not too far away. He used to go down to his place for a bottle of wine and try and get home before curfew. Didn't always do that. And we were sort of kicking this idea around, going quite deep into what the opportunity was, where the software could actually play a part. How could we grow that? So the ideation started during the pandemic, and the first launch was late in 2021 after we raised a bit of money, including
Mhm.
getting money from Australia's biggest broadcaster, Southern Cross Stereo.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. And so tell us what Sonnet does. What are some of the product features?
Yeah, so look, the building block of Sonnet is voice to text, turning spoken word content and transcribing it. And then from that building block, there's a whole lot of different features, again, across the audio publication life cycle and creation life cycle, looking at this content, extracting all the conversational elements and structuring them in a way that they can be used for promotion. So what are good little clips? And when we create a clip, we don't just look at the text, we look at the emotion, we look at laughter, nonverbal cues. All of these recognition rules are built into the platform to understand what's happening and then automatically clip them up and say, hey, here's a clip, we think it's good. So clipping was one of the early foundational features. Then we started to get more complex with the features as one of our customers said, hey, we're just licensing in a huge amount of content down here in Australia from North America, but it's got all these ads for like Delaware auto spares or something local that's specific to the United States. Can we get rid of all of these? And we said, oh, well, sure. How many episodes? And go, well, we've got 15,000 episodes. It's like, okay, maybe we can automate that. Let's have a look at what the baked in ad removal process looks like. So that became a feature after we trained a model looking for how do we do this? We've got to find where someone mentions a brand, then look for the starting point and the end point. We looked at changes of how quickly people speak when they talk about an ad versus natural conversation like we're having now. And we built out that feature. And that's really become a foundational feature of the business. And then on top of that, we go, okay, now we got to replace it with a programmatic marker or a mid-roll marker. How does that look? Do we replace it before the baked in ad? Do we replace it instead of? Do we put one after? Or if there's no baked in ad, how do we find the best place? So the insertion of mid-rolls became another thing. So we were really building these features customer led. And then what's really happened over the last 18 months is the data has become the business. Is like all of this information about what people are talking about, where they're talking about it. Are they talking about it in a brand safe way? we've structured that down into sort of four categories, I guess. What are the target words or the keywords that can lend themselves to good advertising? What's the likely intent of that keyword? If someone's talking about a car, are they thinking about buying it? Do they have an intention to buy a car, or are they talking about cleaning their car? So once you then have the keyword and the intent, you can start to go which product class is interesting to advertise on there. Then you start to look at, okay, so we've got that. What's the demographic mix? No point trying to sell a car, a BMW, to someone who was very low socioeconomic class or even not even driving age. Although in some instances there are people who are buying those cars, but generally not. And then creating audiences. So now we want an audience. We want to be able to target an audience directly, curate that for me, and tell me which brands are the best. So as a publisher, I don't need to go through all of this exercise of trying to structure this data and look at it at scale. We've built a system that can do that for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the products that you've built and why I think that they're important to the industry is for us, really that ad insertion point piece has been very valuable. And as you said, and as much as we all love our embedded ads and we can talk about embedded ads and how great they become outdated, right? I think we all have to agree at some point embedded ads are outdated. We don't want to hear, especially if you've got somebody with 15,000 episodes, we don't want to hear about, the Delaware Fall Festival that happened in 2020. Like that's that's gone and past, right? And so I think that being able, number one, to take out those embedded ads is such an important tool. But then to your point, being able to go ahead and then go back and put those ad insertion points in has been valuable. We have found at True Native that if we're trying to convert a podcast to use dynamic ad insertion, it can take a long time for someone to go back and manually edit a ton of episodes. I know we had one show at one point where they had 1,000 episodes that they manually went through and they took all of the ad insertion points out, and it was a really big deal for them. And so I know that when we were able to use your tool, it has broadened that opportunity for us because it's taken I would say there's two factors. The first is that there are people out there who didn't even consider wanting to transfer to dynamic ad insertion. And then the second, because of all the work that was involved, and then the second really is the speed. So even if we've got someone who's like, "Hey, yeah, I'll do that. We'll be ready to sell ads in 6 to 12 months," right? It's like the time frame for them to go through their back catalog and set it all up by hand is a long time. So it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. And that one product I know for us has given us the ability to really increase revenue fairly substantially on a much quicker basis than we could have if we were doing everything by hand. Is that kind of what you're finding with some of your other clients?
Yeah, and I think it's wonderful to hear, Heather. I think there's a third element to it as well. So not only have you got the time and the money factor, you've now got, when you go to put a new ad in, you now have this understanding of what the conversation is and how it
True.
lends it to a new ad that might have a higher propensity to pay more because of the contextual element. And then if you've got a demographic overlay, you've got even more chance of getting a higher CPM because you've now got the intent of likeliness of that person to buy if they hear that ad or to have brand recognition or what have you. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of different factors that came out of,
Mhm.
really it was just a workflow automation understanding. But like any startup, we've sort of metamorphosized into more of a data platform. And each of these things, like saving time and money, gives us an opportunity to look at the data that underpins that exercise and how
Right.
that can be used to make more money.
So I absolutely see that as being a positive, right? That you're not only looking for kind of where to put the ad marker, you're looking for it in context of what's being said. And even as human beings, we're not going to listen to every single word, right? We're going to scan through things much more quickly. So you really have relied fairly heavily on AI in your business. I'm curious, and I feel like it's just one of those buzzwords now that we just hear everywhere about everything. But how is AI really affected your ability to create this business, and how are you leveraging it to really, I guess, meet the goals of your customers?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is AI is a bit of a buzzword. I really am at pains to try and break it down that our team who work in data, we call them data scientists. They're technicians who are looking at data points. And I suppose if you look at what AI does, is it's like it's really fast moving or smart rules that can take data or create data and structure it and come up with something that's really helpful. I really don't think it's just trying to demyst. There's that much magic in it. We call them data scientists. So what's happened is the computing power that's now available, especially in the cloud computing, enables data to be explored and created and structured so much quicker. So really, that's what AI is. You've got all these data points and you can connect them with rules really quickly. Where the opportunity is, going back to my sort of metaphor of cutting the tape, is that that hasn't really been applied to this industry because traditionally conversation's quite an opaque sort of thing. There's lots of different elements and the computing power wasn't really there to say, to apply a human sort of structure to it. Oh, they're talking about cars. They're talking about buying a car. Because we can do that now, that can be used in a multitude of different ways. And advertising's really the sort of thing that everyone in podcasts saying, well, we need to get more advertising. We need to lift the industry. And there's still this tension between traditional analog broadcast way of doing things and digital advertising where people have been burnt in the past, bad ads have run, it could sound really shouty like radio. And so over the last couple of years, we've sort of listened to what has been the message around data and AI and all of these things that are buzzing around. We don't want them as an industry to impact the intimate nature of podcasting and the advertising that's been served traditionally by baked in. So our job has been to structure the data, and we've been doing this now for a while. How do we help lift the advertising revenue boat without destroying the intimacy of the medium? And
Mhm.
again, AI is one of those things that if you ask it or train it to do it in this way, yes, we can achieve that really effectively. So AI is kind of like incredibly powerful. It's just powerful computers. How do we create data that enables us to do programmatic advertising that sounds like something, a continuation of the
Mhm.
intimate nature of the conversation that we were previously having? That's the beauty of AI is we can do that now at scale.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, I definitely do think that there's a conversation going on right now about AI generated post-read ads, right? Where we're using AI to take someone's voice and have that ad be read by AI, but it sounds like it's the host. I know that there's been some conversation that's taken place at the IAB level. I know one of the US based agencies came out and said that's unethical, like you can't do that type thing. But to your point, the reality is that all sit around and say we need to figure out the long tail here. And the only way that you can figure out the long tail with whatever the number is, 4 million podcasts out there, is by leveraging things like technology. It doesn't work to try and rely on humans. And I thought it was so interesting. I had a conversation with someone in this space the other day that was close to a media buyer in this space, and this media buyer had $150,000 budget, and the choices that they could make were they could buy one or two shows and spend their $150,000, or they could buy 20 shows and spend their $150,000. What's quicker for a media buyer? Is it quicker to buy one or two shows, or is it quicker to buy 20? Right? You've got to figure that when a media buyer is faced with managing lots of campaigns and lots of clients, they're going to take that path of least resistance, right? They're not likely to say, "Can I quadruple my work? That sounds like a great plan today," right? Like they're just going to take that path of least resistance. And I don't think that we're ever going to get to a place where the long tail is truly monetized if we're not looking at these technology solutions. What's your take on it?
No, I think you're 100% right. And going back to our initial bottles of wine during lockdown, that was exactly what we thought those years ago, is that you have to use technology to be able to monetize it. Because if I've got a fly fishing podcast, and it's quite a niche sport, although I have found out using this example, there are a lot of fly fisher people out there. But if you've got a fly fishing podcast, let's say it's massive and you've got 10,000 downloads or 20,000, but you're a big advertiser in a holding company and you say, look, I'm representing like this massive outdoor brand. They want to reach 1 million people. To your point, you've got to go negotiate 20 different deals to sponsor 20 different outdoor shows to get that reach and frequency. But if there's lots of different conversations going on around outdoors and fishing, and they exist in potentially hundreds of different shows and thousands of different episodes, and we know exactly where those conversations are happening, we're able to say with the data, hey, listen, you can reach 10 million people. We're going to run an ad in every one of these spots across all of these shows. You don't need to do anything. You just need to buy it as one line item and let the technology do the rest. Then you've solved the problem. Now, that's what we've been aiming to do and moving towards that pretty quickly. And you can then monetize that long tail, because that conversation, you may have 20 downloads, but if each of those people are rusted on fly fishers and you're trying to sell them your particular lure, they're the perfect people to reach. And if you can multiply that seamlessly with a nice programmatic buy, yes, you're going to do that, as opposed to, I'm not going to negotiate or try and find it. So I actually probably not even going to buy any audio. I'll just stick with display and CTV
Right.
and the things I can reach easily.
Right, right. Well, and I think also that there are really niche audiences, as you've given the example of the fly fisherman. But I know I was talking with an advertiser at one point who said they wanted to reach librarians. Well, I am sure that there are tons of librarians who listen to podcasts, right? But trying to identify those podcasts isn't particularly easy. And I'm sure that there probably is a handful of librarian podcasts out there, but how many people are actually listening to them? I do think that when you're talking about contextual targeting, you have this ability to reach shows, because part of what we talk about also is that we classify everything with a particular genre, right? And one of the things that we've been discussing lately is that podcasters choose genres because they think they can chart in those genres. Maybe they are an entertainment podcast, but they think I have a better chance of charting in news than I do in entertainment. So
Right.
I'm going
Yeah.
to choose that, right? Or it's fascinating to me, to be honest, when we will onboard a show and I'll be like, "You're in what genre? Like, why did you pick that?" But they did it for a reason, right? And so when we're manually trying to filter through all of these things and we have an advertiser that's like, we're only going to advertise on health and fitness podcasts. And it's like, well, who else are you missing in the space? And I love, one of my favorite examples is the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett's podcast. I don't know how much he talks about being a CEO on that podcast, because I listen to it all the time and
Yep.
it's not very often, I can tell you. Mostly he talks about mindset and health and fitness and lots of different things. And a lot of it doesn't have to do with business. And so you could take that show and say, he would be a bad fit for this type of advertiser, when in fact, maybe he would be a great fit advertiser. And so there is
Yep.
so much that you can do with that true AI contextual targeting.
Yeah, and I think context is really only, it's almost the icing on the cake, to be honest. After a lot of conversations with big holding companies and advertisers, contextual's great. Like, that really levels up the effectiveness of the ad, but the intent and the demographic mix is probably still the
The most
most
important.
important. And what's really interesting, I think, when you're looking at something like your fitness example, if I'm Adidas and I'm trying to sell fitness shorts, it makes sense to go for a fitness podcast, right? But if you actually think about it, and you apply, so I did a master's in marketing a long time ago, so it's sort of a little bit of a hobby horse. But if you think about what the buying intent is, if I'm going to the gym, I've got my shorts, like I've probably got my brand, and I'm probably quite loyal to my brand. Like, I always wear ASICS shoes when I go to the gym. I have since I was at university. I'm loyal to that brand. who is more likely to want to buy a pair of fitness shorts is those entering the market or those people who are unfit who are now wanting to get fit. They're the ones to target. So your traditional method of thinking around contextual is like, okay, well, someone who's fit, I want to sell them fitness shorts is actually someone who is unfit, who wants to get fit, probably has a higher
It's a better
buying intent.
customer.
Yeah. So this kind of data, when it can play nicely with traditional marketing models or do it in an omni-channel sense, is much better because you're not just going to rely, if you're a big company, you're not just going to rely on podcasting to do all your sales. And to your librarian example, we've got the technology, assume it's GDPR compliant, however it comes through, to say, "Oh, we can find people that listen to podcasts that work in this building or this campus by IP address." Now, if we know that hundreds of people are listening to this podcast at this IP address, let's say it's a university campus, and there's a bus stop out the front that's got a display, digital display where they're waiting for the bus or the tram or the train, we know they're listening to this podcast. We know what the likely brands are for that. As they come out, you hit them with the same brand while they're waiting for the bus stop. Now you were into really successful omni-channel marketing. So, your one sort of click kill, one sort of click sale, that's what people want.
Mhm.
But in terms of the brand mix, we always see it as omni-channel marketing, especially for the bigger advertisers who we all want to attract. They want audio as part of their mix. They
Right.
want to do it effectively. So that's where the disconnect's been. To your example of we've got to negotiate now with 20 pubs to get that sort of reach and frequency. If we can get a line item that looks like the rest of the omni-channel mix, then we can really scale podcasting. And if I can just rewind to the idea of cloning voices, I think to come out and say it's unethical is just one opinion. I don't really think governing bodies should be saying that because if I'm a talent and I say, actually, I'm happy for my voice to be cloned, or if like the John Lennon's estate says, we're happy for John Lennon's voice to be cloned and do advertising because we can make more money from it, then that should be the creator or the artist's right to say, yeah, I'm happy for my voice to be cloned. If you're going to pay me for every ad that gets served, I'm going to get 20 cents for every ad that's created, and I don't have to do any more work and I can create a royalty for myself, bring it on. So I don't think that a governing body setting a hard and fast rule like that speaks for everyone. They certainly don't speak for some of the artists I've spoken to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I do think that having some indication that ads might be like, just like we say, hey, there's pixel tracking that happens on this show. If you want to opt out of it, this is how you do it. In the same way, letting the listener know, hey, there are AI generated ads running on this program. If you want to know, hey, it's AI generated. But I mean, the reality is that the host can approve the script. The host could even write the script, right? And we know that there's there's opportunities for the host to make sure that their voice is being represented in a way that they want it to be represented. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes there. I do think that from a host read perspective, while I see the power of AI generated, I also do think that there is a level of creativity with that host read that is powerful. And I'm curious how it's going to pan out. I feel like often the announcer read ads that I hear are done quite effectively. And if announcer read ads are done effectively, to be honest, that could be an AI generated ad too, right? It doesn't have to be a person really who's generating that. So there's so many opportunities with that, and I don't think that there's a way around using AI generated voices. It's just going to become commonplace, and I'm not even sure how long it's going to take for it to become commonplace.
I think it's here.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Over the weekend, I was like, I need a video for this project I'm working on. And in 30 minutes, I was able to create a full 3-minute video that had all the information I wanted and it sounded great and it cost me nothing. Like it's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
no, I'm with you. We've done the same thing, and it's funny, we were talking amongst ourselves about 10 years ago, if we'd have produced 3 videos of sort of 90 seconds each using different voice actors and hired them using a Voice Bunny platform, had to iterate multiple times because they were in Britain or America and we were in Australia. And, we would have got no change out of $25,000 for this kind of exercise. And yet we could storyboard it using a chat GPT, put it together with a CapCut or a Premiere Pro, get the voiceover with an 11 Labs and get some really good sounding voices. And it cost us $20 a month subscription. So that's kind of democratized really quickly. And I think that will scale. Obviously, the thing that doesn't scale is the creative part. Like,
Right, exactly.
if you're going to have something that really cuts through, you're still going to have to use your brain and be creative. If you want to sound like you're putting an ad out there and going through the motions, or you clone it off something that's really creative, then you got the same creative that can be applied to a whole lot of different ad reads. That'll work. But the next time you want to do something that cuts through again, you have to level up your brain. You have to actually have a creative team that says, we're going to do something different. We're going to think about how we read this differently or whatever that is, or put a different music in. That's still going to be the human element. Once you've done it, you can train it and say, train yourself on this AI model and try and replicate some really cool stuff. But the only way you can clone a Quentin Tarantino movie is by feeding it all the Quentin Tarantino movies and say, now do me something that looks like that. There was nothing that could have said, unless a human prompted it to say, I want spaghetti westerns, cross Japanese manga,
Right.
you'd need the human element to still be creative, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, you were kind of mentioning all of the different ways to run omni-channel campaigns. And to my knowledge, which could be wrong, there isn't a way just yet for ads to be run on podcasts in particular where they're retargeting ads. So, we've all had that experience where either we're online looking at shoes or boots or something in particular, then we jump on Instagram and all of a sudden our feed's full of boot companies it doesn't seem like it matters where you're at. It's like all of a sudden you've got ads following you around. So while there is the opportunity to do omni-channel targeting using those IP addresses, we're not doing the retargeting just yet, right? Or do you
Yeah, I
know if
mean,
that is happening?
there definitely is retargeting. Now, I'm going to hedge my bets here because I can't remember whether the targeting begins with the podcast or the retargeting happens in the podcast. But there's definitely elements of targeting using
Sure.
podcasts. We've done it with customers that have their own app. So
Mhm.
they've got their own app and then they can use the first party data from that to
Right.
retarget at other points in the funnel, especially if they've
Right,
logged
right,
in iPhone.
right.
So there is elements of retargeting. I think that the retargeting is a huge opportunity, having those different strands of creative across different mediums. I think there's also a lot of stuff we're seeing now of targeting through retail media networks as well. This is, I believe, one of the big emerging opportunities. And if you think, or actually, if you look at the American Airlines just announced they were going to create their own retail media network. Now, here's a great opportunity where you've got content that's either going to be displayed on your seatback screen or you'll plug in and listen to the podcasts that are licensed on the American Airlines suite.
Mhm.
And then they know who you are. You bought the ticket. They know
Right.
where you're sitting. And if you're an American Airlines Advantage member or whatever their frequent flyer program is, they've got a lot of data about you that you probably opted in to share. Now, that can create an incredibly rich opportunity for a podcast advertiser to be in that particular show. Because if you're sitting in seat 1A, yes, I am going to try and advertise a BMW to you. If you're sitting in seat 26A, I might try and advertise a Toyota to you.
Hey, I sit
So
in row
what this all
26 all the time, Tony. What are you trying to say?
well,
Joking,
I'm a
joking.
real simple guy. I'm just, simple examples.
No, it makes total sense, right? Like they know so much about you. And we know that results in any sort of advertising happen with correct targeting. Like that's hands down the most important piece, right?
Absolutely. So where we're going to get to, I think, and this is where it all kind of intersects, is if you were on the plane, you could imagine every single person on that plane listening to the same podcast, getting a slightly different ad, possibly served at a slightly different place. So if you're talking about buying a car, someone might get an ad for the car. buy this Toyota. Someone might get an ad for car insurance. Someone might get an ad for cleaning their car or where to get it washed because we know where they live and because we've got that information. And all of the creative will be based off one creative element where each of the separate ads is cloned via AI to sound like a host read ad. Now, I see that as a very realistic place we're going to get to. How quickly we get there, I don't know. I personally think it'll be within 18 to 24 months where that'll really start to take shape. But I can't see an industry really thriving and getting to that level because there's such a mismatch between how much people listen to audio and how little revenue audio gets from that whole media mix. To close the gap, that's the kind of technology that's going to have to be applied to really get the advertising dollars through. But I
Yeah.
see it happening.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that I was shocked when just moving from traditional media where, newspaper, radio, where we couldn't track anything to now being able to track so much. And the spending has increased dramatically. Granted, everything has increased dramatically in the last 20 years for sure, but I absolutely believe that part of the reason that people do not spend more on audio is because they cannot see that direct connection enough. Even though we've got pixel tracking, even though we've got that attribution capability of saying, hey, this person listened and then they went and bought something, we still struggle with that. And I agree with you. There's a multitude of layers, the targeting in particular, and the seeing the results that happened from that spend, having all of the in-depth data that they're used to getting just in digital advertising, I think that that will make a big difference in people's spends.
Yeah. And I think, Heather, one of the insights, again, we learned from speaking to all these advertisers is that a lot of the buyers are really data savvy people.
Absolutely.
So what they're able to do, again, if you look at display or any of the other mediums, is they're able to iterate and measure and iterate really quickly. Even when AdWords first came out, like 20 odd years ago, it used to have A and B testing built into it. So you would write two ads and you could see the performance of both and you can get rid of the underperforming one and put a new one in. And if that was better, and so on and so forth. Now, until podcasting gets to that level of measurement and iteration, it's not going to be as effective as any of the other channels. Because if I'm a marketer and I go to my client and it's Toyota and I say, okay, let's have a look at how your campaign is going. We go and see display. This is what we did and we changed this and now we're getting really good cut through and it's performing better than anything else and so on CTV. Until you can do that in audio, we've got this little black box down here that looks like audio. We'll catch you up on that at the end of the campaign when we can sort of pull everything together. I'm exaggerating the point, but kind of get where audio is. It's got a lot of catch up to play and it has to get to that data-driven measurement stage as well. So all of the elements, this really ties back to the original reason we thought this was a great place to go into. All of these elements will come together via data. The industry's still got a long way to go and the gap to close between 30% of media is audio and 9% of advertising revenue. There's 21% growth there just on existing structures. So we're dedicated for all of us to get that share of money that the industry deserves because it's got the share of audience, it's got the share of attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like that is such a good note to close on because you're right. There is so much opportunity. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing the work that you're doing to try and see how we can capture those dollars. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Heather.
If people want to connect with you, where is a good place for them to find you?
Sonnant.com, Tony Simmons on LinkedIn under Sonnant. Follow the website and love to hear from you.
Terrific. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. I know we talked about the fact that AI is a buzzword. It is everywhere. We know it's everywhere, but it's so interesting to see how it's all going to unfold. If you haven't hit my YouTube channel, please head on over to YouTube and see what we've got over there. And I will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast to Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast to advertising industry.